Welcome to One Bite is Everything. This is not an everyday episode. It's not about an everyday food, but it is a fascinating look behind the scenes on the ethical, environmental, and humane aspects surrounding the quite elite business of farming caviar. Many years ago, when my husband and I were just married, he received a gift of caviar with the blini and the creme fraiche from a vendor at work. We joined forces with another couple who brought a bottle of champagne, and we rang in the new year together. We still talk about that simple memory, a high-end potluck party from long before both of us had any kids or any kind of disposable income that we could spend on caviar. Caviar is still pretty far from common in my life, but I do see it on a menu or in a shop from time to time and wonder about its journey from the water to the plate. And today, I am going to share with you that story. Here's how this one started. I had the good fortune to spend about an hour with Chef David DeSalvo of Bowery Meats, a restaurant in New York City that is still on my list. Chef David is the one who connected me with Jordan Beeman of Heart Brand Beef in Texas, where an unusual legal loophole allowed 15 Akaushi beef cattle to travel from Japan to the United States, where they started a herd of Wagyu beef. I will link that episode in the show notes. It's a really good one, with some hot takes, inside scoops for sure, and a few good laughs from a rancher who really knows his business. From Chef David's perspective, when you're in the business of serving the best steak in the country, you are also going to serve the best caviar. And the caviar business is, according to Chef David and today's guest, full of shenanigans. Today's caviar is from a farm in Italy, and our tour guide is Matteo Pozzi of Adamas Caviar, which is farmed in northern Italy at the Salmo Pan, a third-generation fish farm located in Pandino in the Tormo River National Park, where it's fed by multiple natural springs. Salmo Pan is a privately owned farm where the sturgeon is hand-reared and cultivated from egg to egg. Let's put on our very finest and dive into the exclusive and fascinating world of caviar.
The farm in Italy, it's been 3 generations now that they've repurposed to sturgeon. It was born as a trout farm and a salmon farm. Now, the salmon was quickly pretty much dismissed because obviously the competition is too large and difficult to compete with. But the trout farm stayed. And because of the environment in which the trouts have to live, which is a very clean, pristine water, then we were able to move on to sturgeon roughly when the wild-caught sturgeon became illegal. So the sturgeon is a prehistoric fish. The shape resembles almost something that is a crossbreed between a fish and an alligator. So it has scales like a fish, but they're hardened. So it's really prehistoric looking. And it has not evolved with the same pace that other fish have. So it has retained a lot of very prehistoric behaviors. For example, the sturgeon, any kind of sturgeon, they're all bottom feeders. So like other fish that they feed to whatever is on the bottom of the sea or the bottom of a fish tank, they don't discriminate on what they eat. But one big point of raising a good sturgeon is what they're going to eat. So that is already like something that a farm can do in a certain way and in a controlled way that doesn't happen in nature. Then another interesting thing, you cannot tell whether it's female or male until it reaches maturity. And the fish to reach maturity, like some of the, let's say, faster sturgeons, it still take about 8 years. Like there's no adult sturgeon before 8 years or so. Now, there are some countries that are able to sort of speed up this growth. And there are, like we said, some gray areas legally where this is allowed. But overall, when the fish grows naturally, that's how long it takes. And some, like the beluga, which is probably the most famous sturgeon out there, is one of the biggest ones.
When it comes to sturgeon, there's a fascinating variety beyond the well-known beluga. There's the white sturgeon, a giant of the Pacific Northwest, the Atlantic sturgeon residing in the eastern coast of North America, the Russian sturgeon, a star in the caviar world, and the smaller but equally intriguing sterlet. Then we have the ancient lake sturgeon, a living relic from the Great Lakes, and the Kaluga, which rivals the beluga in size and caviar quality. Lastly, there are the Sevruga and Siberian sturgeons, each contributing their own unique flavors to the caviar market. These species are spread across the globe from North America to Siberia, all highly sought after.
And it also takes much more to get to maturity. It takes about 25 years. So you don't get any eggs before 25 years. So the joke is that the ROI, the return over investment, when you start a fish farm, a sturgeon farm, is usually twice the life of the fish. So you're looking at a 50-year or so if you're planning all belugas, which is very, very difficult to get into the business. You don't really know how much yield you're going to have for that generation until they reach maturity. And then in nature, what happens is that the female lays the eggs and then the male fertilize them. And this is similar for most fish. And instead, when you have a farm, the two options are you either kill the female and extract the eggs, or you can milk her. Now, we can go into the details of what both entails because there are arguments on both sides of what's most ethical.
So just a question, in the wild, where are we finding sturgeon?
Sure. So originally, the history goes that they were found in the Caspian Sea. That's sort of like the place where all the sturgeon culture was born. Nowadays is, though, very difficult to find fish in that sturgeons in that sea, just because of the rate at which they were caught. And also, now that it's illegal to wild catch them, there's also a lot of poachers. So it's still difficult to understand how much is left in that sea. But we also had fish in Italy, in the Adriatic Sea, some sturgeons there called the Nakari, and also in a lot of rivers and lakes in Asia and in Northern Europe. But I would say the majority, you always think about the Caspian Sea.
And the laws, tell me what happened.
So what happened is that the sturgeon was recognized as an endangered species, which by the rate that it was being caught, it was in danger for a lot of years. So the CITES, the international regulator for endangered species, and we're talking any kind of species, even plants, animals, put sturgeons in their list. That meant that all the international trade had to be controlled, and therefore all wild fish would become illegal. Basically, it's the same for, like, let's say rhinos, right? Rhinos are endangered species. They're on this list. Any international trade is considered illegal. Therefore, any wild caught rhino and killed would be an illegal action. Obviously, there are no farms, but that's where the difference comes, where the sturgeons were allowed to then be farmed. And then caviar could be then extract caviar or like meat or even leather from the scales of the fish actually can be obtained through farming.
Sturgeons are true multitaskers in the aquatic world, offering more than just their famous caviar. Sturgeon also provide firm, flavorful meat that's a delicacy in its own right. Also, isinglass, a unique gelatin once prized for clarifying beer and wine, and even their durable skin can be transformed into high-quality leather. These products highlight the sturgeon's value, but also underscore the need for sustainable practices to protect these remarkable fish. So talk to me a little bit about what you mentioned in terms of milking or killing the females for eggs.
Yes, these are the two main options when it comes to extracting the caviar from the fish. I'll start with the more traditional, the killing. The killing of the fish is simply after a certain amount of year. Let's say that the fish reaches maturity at 8 years. So it's a fish 8 years old, but the eggs are not yet quite the size that you want. So you take samples of those eggs. It's a small incision, and that is done in any case, whether you choose milking or killing. But then let's say they're not big enough, you put the female back in the tank. Next year, it will reabsorb the eggs. Next year, it will make them again, and they will be a little larger. So the fish is not killed at maturity. It's killed when it's old enough that the eggs that it produces are of the desired size and color. So let's say it takes, for a fish that is 80 years old, it takes another, let's say 3 or 4 years. It's about 10, 11. Then it's the right time and you decide, okay, I'm going to extract the caviar. Therefore, you just kill them with a very fast needle in the head. So that is sort of painless. And then the fish is cut through the bottom and extracted the whole sack of eggs. And then the eggs go through a mash so that they can be extracted singularly, pretty much. And that is considered the traditional method, like meaning that it's obviously the first one that was ever invented and the one that requires the least amount of steps, let's say, is the faster one. The other one, the milking, it came by much later as an alternative, more ethical way of extracting caviar. And it involves simply, when the female is ready, to literally milk the fish in order to extract the egg. However, the argument against it is that to do this, you need to promote not just the pregnancy, but the birth. So you need to use a significant amount of hormones to induce the birth of the eggs and milk them out of the fish while it's still alive and out of the water and moving around. So you need to sort of like keep her pretty tight and straight, and then you put her back in the tank. Now, the argument against it is that this traumatized the fish. So female fish that go through milking process usually do not make eggs for a number of years after. And some may never make eggs again. Now, that's difficult. Usually after a number of years they do, but still it's a very traumatic process because it's sort of like an abortion. And it involves a number of hormones that are, although approved, they're not necessarily, in the eyes of the customer, something good that you want to do. So the two arguments collide, in my opinion. This is what we think in our farm, where you need to look at the age of the fish. We have an industry of, let's say, the salmon that kills fish every 2-3 years at max. We have industry of all kinds of different fish that kills the fish when they are within a year of life. We're talking about a fish now that it's 10, 11, 13, 15, all the way to like 50 years old sometimes. So a fish that is very old, has lived in incredible waters, taken care of, cured of diseases, given the best food. And then you need to decide whether to traumatize the fish and utilize it again, or to kill it fast and painless. In our opinion, the first option is still the more ethical one, compared to all, like I said, all the rest of the industry. But like I said, there are people instead that prefer the milking process, also because they may need that fish, because since it takes a lot of time to grow one, they just cannot afford to grow it from the start again. So it's also not cheaper to kill it, because then you cannot use it ever again.
So how, as a consumer, would you know whether your fish were killed?
Unfortunately, there's no way to know on the package. There's no communication unless it's the farm that decides to put it out there, either on their website or through communications like this. That is an information that it's just simply not transmitted to the customer. And unfortunately, that is not the only one. There are a couple of other informations that really don't get to the customer. And that's where the industry becomes murkier. right? It gets to like that. You need to know who you're dealing with more than what you're dealing with. Like, it's not really the product, it's more who you're dealing with. Because, for example, I talked about some countries being able to grow fish at a much higher rate. That is because they are allowed to use certain hormones for growth. And in most countries, it's not. But then that makes the caviar grow much faster. So you can harvest it much faster. So you can have more production. But then the hormones are not left in the caviar. So when the customer arrives, technically it's a perfectly fine product. But if the customer knew, then I don't know if they would be of the same opinion.
Your sturgeon farm is
Correct.
in Italy. Now, explain a little bit about the farm to me, but also about the regulations in Italy and what's allowed.
So our farm is in the north of Italy, in Cremona, it's south of Milan, about 20-30 minutes from Milan. And it's considered more of a smaller farm.
Italian farms primarily cultivate species like Siberian, white, and Russian sturgeon, offering a range of caviar from rich beluga to nutty osetra and delicate sevruga. These operations not only contribute significantly to the local economy, but also position Italy as a leader in sustainable aquaculture. Italy's sturgeon farms are a shining example of how tradition and innovation can blend to create world-class products with a commitment to quality and environmental stewardship. The Salmo-Pan farm has a long history in aquaculture and has gained international acclaim for their innovative and sustainable practices. Adamas, the company that represents the caviar from the farm, offers a diverse range of caviar from imperial beluga to golden Adamas, catering to a global market that appreciates luxury, tradition, and transparency in every tin. Adamas, in Latin, means diamond.
We're definitely not like a big industrial farm. We have about 500,000 fish divided into a number of pools. The biggest difference with a lot of other farms is our water system. Our water system is considered open circuit compared to closed circuit, which means that we have a water source, which is an underground spring, extremely clear and high mineral. So it's a great source that we are lucky to have. And we have this in the form of a small river. We deviate part of that river into the farm so that the water flows through the tank to the pools. The pools are open between one and the other so that the water can flow through. Then there's a decanting area because the water will drag with it all the residuals from the fish so that they don't eat those, because that's another thing that they would like to eat. Then after thing is decanted, then the water is filtered again and goes back into the river. Because of the amount of filtration and oxidation that we do at the farm, the water actually comes out cleaner than how it entered. So like you were asking about the regulations, the health department is very happy about what we do, because for them it's a filtering and improving of the water that's already a really nice, clear source of water. In terms of other regulations, there's the food that you give to the fish. This is what we use as a non-GMO approved for sturgeon farming, and it's European certified producer. They produce a number of fish food for different kind of species. And then what we have in Italy is monthly usually, but it could be more, controls by the health department. What you would get in the US every, I don't know, years or so, like they don't really come as often as probably as they should. In Italy, at least once a month, they're there. Obviously, without any appointment, they just show up. You need to be able to open the books and to show around and see everything is certified. In terms of antibiotics, hormones, and everything, nothing is allowed. It is allowed a small amount, which I'm not so sure about the details, but a small amount of medicines, because the fish sometimes get sick, especially when they're kids. But after a certain age, nothing is allowed. So it's allowed, I think it's in the baby phase, which is, I think, the first 2-3 years. But then after that, when they sort of gain towards their teenage year, let's say, then that's no longer allowed, because obviously these medicines, you don't want them to get anywhere close to when the fish becomes an adult.
In this business, like in many farming sectors, if you want to know what you're eating, you really do need to know your farmer, because where they're growing, what their practices are environmentally, but also in terms of the kind of food they're feeding, whether you're okay with GMO or a non-GMO. And just from a harvesting perspective, if you're growing with hormones or growth promotants, or if you're harvesting with hormones, that could potentially impact your food.
There's no proof that the growing with hormones will then end up in the eggs. As I said, all the studies that have been conducted have not resulted in any hormones left in the caviar. But there's only really one Asian country that is supposed to be using these hormones. So it's a very sort of like no one is doing it besides them, or allegedly them.
This is China?
Yes.
Okay,
I didn't know whether we wanted to go on the hot topic or not. But I'll just say this, since we are talking about it. Their production started roughly at the end of the 90s, 1998, 1997. And their biggest production is the beluga or hybrids of the beluga, which takes about 25 years. So we're just about at the time when they would be ready, right? Right about now, like 2-3 years. They should be in the market for like 2-3 years. Yet they've been in the market for 15 years past, if not more. So how could they grow the amount of fish in order to make the amount of caviar that they're making in half the time that the fish is able to grow?
So, well, the answer to that question could either be they've figured out how to grow them twice as fast, or it's not beluga caviar.
Exactly. However, to know that it's not beluga caviar, and you can know what kind of species it is by just doing a biological analysis on the caviar. And there are a number of third-party laboratories that do it. And it does come out as beluga or beluga hybrid caviar. So that second part is no longer there. Everyone asserted that is that kind of beluga or beluga hybrid. Going back for 1 second about what you said about knowing your farmer, there's also another point of view, in my opinion, that the customer can at least has an opportunity to do the first step, is looking for traceability. In our farm and many farms, not just us, we pride ourselves to put what is called the CITES code. CITES is the SITES. That's the organization that I said is monitoring all the endangered species. The CITES ID basically tells you the life and death of the fish. It tells you the species of sturgeon, tells you whether it's caught or wild. It tells you where it was from, Italy, Germany, Poland. It tells you when it was harvested. It tells you the code of the farm itself, if you want to go and look it up. And it tells you the serial number of the fish. So all of this is very, very important to have on the final tin that the customer purchases, because then they know exactly what is in that tin. And then if they want to make their own research, they can go back to the exact farm. And a lot of other farmers decide not to put it because that is also a form of responsibility. Because the moment that something's not going well, you're supposed to either discard the whole lot numbers, or you're supposed to trace back to the farmer and to the farm and have controls made at the farm as to, for example, there could be, let's say, some sort of bacteria, but you don't know whether it formed there or it formed back at the farm. Or to the most basic thing, it could be that you're purchasing one kind of caviar, let's say Osetra, which is golden stady. It's one of the more known and higher quality that we can have in the US, since the beluga technically is illegal. In the US, we can only have beluga hybrids. But on the back of the tin, the CITES doesn't say GUE, which is the golden stady, then the specific name, the scientific name for Osetra, but it says another name. Therefore, you'd be buying what someone is selling you as one fish, but instead is another. Still sturgeon, but two different fish, two different, very different qualities and very different prices too. So that's why traceability, in my opinion, is another way that the customer can always like do the first step. But then, yes, of course, knowing the farmer is probably the second.
The CITES ID for caviar provides detailed traceability, including the sturgeon species, for example, HUS for beluga or GUE for osetra. Whether the sturgeon was wild or farmed, although sturgeon should never be wild caught anymore. The country of origin, for example, IT for Italy, the specific farm code, the year of harvest, and a serial number for the tin. This extensive code ensures that all relevant information about the caviar is available for verification, compliance, and traceability. Let's talk about the economics. You have 500,000 fish in various stages of life. When you harvest a robust female sturgeon, how much caviar do you get?
When it's time for harvesting, I would say about 10% of the fish weight becomes caviar. Now, each sturgeon has different sizes. So, for example, a Siberian or an Osetra, the Golden State, they're smaller sturgeons. They're not that big. But then you go to, for example, the white sturgeon, the American, or the beluga, which is pretty much the biggest one. And they can go up to 7-8 feet long, like multiple hundreds of pounds of fish. That means that 10% is obviously a lot bigger. So it's not enough to say it's sturgeon. Unfortunately, you need to know which sturgeon produces what, and like how they grow, and how much time does it take for them to grow to adulthood, and how big they become.
A 700-pound sturgeon yields
That
quite
may
a
be
bit
a little too big, but let's say like around 200, 300. Yeah, that's possible. So yeah, it would give you about like, let's say 30 pounds of caviar.
Okay, and then tell me how caviar is sold. By the ounce?
Well, it depends metric system or imperial, right? But actually in the US, usually people that really trade with a lot of caviar, they've started to use the metric system as well. But yeah, you can either do ounces or grams. Roughly 1 ounce is about 28 grams. And the price per gram varies based on the sturgeon that you're harvesting. For example, a good Golden State can go for like $5,000 a kilo, which in ounces is about 2 pounds, 2.2, 2.1 pounds. The beluga for even higher, 7,000. The albino, I've seen it as high as like 15,000 a kilo. The cheaper ones could go for like the Baeri, the Siberian. They can go for, let's say, 2,000, 2,500. It also depends who makes it. Just like wine, for example, the same wine made by two different wineries costs different. So it depends who is farming it. But like each step back is about 30% margin. So it's very, very high. The moment that you have, let's say, 3 or 4 people in between, you have the producer, the importer, the distributor, the retailer, then you're already seeing a price increase of 3 times, pretty much, 3-4 times.
And are you selling it through that chain? So in order for your caviar to reach me, I would go to Bowery Meats, where David is the chef, and I would order it, right? So there I am. And tell me how it gets there. And
Sure. So that's one option. But what we're trying to do, the fact that I'm here in the US, I can talk about the farm, is because what we're doing is we're the US partners of the farm in Italy. And we receive the original tins, the 2 pounds tins, and then we are the ones opening it and turning it into the smaller orders that then would go, for example, to David, to Bowery Meat. Thanks to that, we become both the importer and the distributor. So we are able to somehow keep the price down and cut one step of the chain. And then it goes to David or to fish stores, restaurants, fish stores, or some delicacy deli in New York, especially. There are some. Or otherwise, we work with distributors, but in that case, we do a different kind of job. We just give the 2 pound tin. So we work only as importers. And to them, we are able then to give them a better price than other farms because it's still us in Italy. Basically, Italy is not selling at a price that they would sell to any other distributor. They're selling to their own importer, basically their own US company. So we're trying sort of like whether it's working with distributors or working as distributor to condensate a little bit the chain. But still, when it gets from distributor to then retailer and then to customer, it happens that the price is still twice, 3 times as high as it was at the farm. And that is for the United States. Obviously, for the US or other countries, it can work differently. For example, Europe, it works directly from the farm. So obviously for them, they have a much better deal because there's just no need for importers, no need for distributors. They can be all in one.
Just go direct to the farm and buy it there.
Correct. Yes, which is why a lot of people are doing the same here in the US with local farmers, even like sturgeon farmers. We have a few really good farmers in California. There's a big one in Florida, in Idaho, and in North Carolina, some that I remember off the top of my head.
Can you talk a little bit about the overall industry, like how big it is?
We have the US, there's Argentina, Madagascar, Italy, Poland, Belgium, I think France a bit, then Azerbaijan or Iran or Israel. There's a lot of like Middle Eastern country. You also technically have Russia, but Russia has a embargo from exporting and also from importing. They are just protecting their caviar. It's only theirs. Nothing can get in or out, which is another interesting fact when a lot of people think that all caviar comes from Russia. And technically there shouldn't be any Russian caviar on the market if we're following rules. China is a big producer, and I don't think that there are many others in Asia. I'm not familiar with that market, to be honest. But in overall production wise, in worldwide, we're talking probably over the 400 tons a year. It's probably between 500 and 1,000 ton a year, of which China is supposed to do about a third. And we don't have numbers on Russia, obviously, for the reason that they don't trade at all. Quantity-wise, then definitely after China, the US probably is very, very large, if not the second largest, the third. Italy is a large producer as well, but just because of the size of the country, we don't have the large farms that we can have like in the US or in China, for example. Northern countries in Euros are much more boutique style. They're still a great producer, and some of the best caviar come from there as well. And nothing to take away from the Italian caviar, because we are considered and we've been awarded a number of times as one of the best caviars in the market. But in terms of dollar amount, we are, I believe, well into double, if not triple digits, billions of dollars a year worldwide. Last time I checked, I believe it was around 80 to 100 billion. So it's a very large market, especially when you count it worldwide. And the fact that a small amount of product goes a long way because it's just such a high price for it.
We've talked about some of the rules and the laws and no wild sturgeon, and what other kind of shenanigans and corruption are going on in the sturgeon business?
Yeah, well, so for example, there's a couple things I can think of. One is that traceability, the CITES code that I was talking about, it's not easily found on tins. Like most producers you'll see on the market, you'll just buy and it says lot code and an expiration date, and that's it.
They've declined for it to be traceable?
They don't see the necessity of putting it on the tin, although legally you need to put it on. And the problem is that there's simply no enforcement against it. So no inspector will go into each store and check behind the tins and check, okay, this one doesn't have the CITES code. Let's go to the farm and ask. It's such a difficult process. So a lot of farms, they're not necessarily farms. They could be importers that they don't have any farm in the US and decide to import from all kinds of countries and then sort of put their label on and say this is this kind of caviar and put a lot number and an expiration date. That's it. The customer is trusting that the front label, which is a commercial label that the importer, broker, distributor puts on, is what it's in the tin. But unless you have the code on the back and you have full traceability and you have the contact to reach the farm directly, there's no way to know for real, unless you make an analysis of which is, besides costly, time consuming, and you're not eating the caviar you bought. So no consumer would do it. And besides that, the other murky sort of difficult thing to understand is the ingredients, right? In the US, we have a regulation that is pure salt. So the only other preservative allowed with caviar is table salt. Or more likely, it's called, although it sounds bad, but it's called chemical salt, but it's simply because it's 100% sodium chloride. So it's simply like there's no impurity. So, but the classic table salt that we have. However, in Europe, another kind of preservative is allowed, which is the borax, is sodium tetraborate, which is another kind of salt that here in the US is used more for, I think, as a cleaner for clothes and as a bath salt of some sort. Now, the argument is opposite. So while a lot of customers in the US do not want it, and the regulation is that traces are allowed, but putting the right amount is not allowed, a lot of studies conducted by third parties prove the opposite, that we should be using borax over table salt because borax has a higher lethal dose than table salt. Lethal dose means what is the amount of that substance needed to kill a human. Salt, you need less table salt that we consume daily to kill a human than borax. So borax technically is safer. Not only that, borax, or actually boron, the main component, is proved to be extremely beneficent to articulations. But the pharmaceutical industry banned the use of borax in food. The question is why? And you look at the hospice, late age care facilities, and just simply medicine against arthritis are a huge industry. Borax would be a natural way to sort of go against that. And so
against arthritis?
Yes, correct. It helps with all ligaments and all. So you don't know exactly what happened there, but the fact is that it was not allowed as a food preservative, despite being safer. And those are the health benefits. It's not me saying it. There are third-party, obviously, certified studies for it that prove it, that it would be a better option as a preservative. And that's why in Europe is allowed. And Europe is preferred over the regular pure salt.
They use it as a combination, borax and pure salt, or just use the borax?
No, they just use the borax when it comes to the caviar production as a preservative, because borax doesn't have any taste. It's completely tasteless. What I mean by tasteless is that when it's used in food, you don't taste any change in the food itself. So while table salt is considered a food enhancer, right? That whether it's good or bad, you're going to taste more. Borax is going to preserve the food as is, but it's not going to alter the actual taste, which in caviar is a big factor. Besides that, it lasts longer as a preservative. So with borax, you would be able to keep caviar edible for well over a year. With table salt, with the regular pure salt, more than 6 months, it's very difficult. And so that's the problem, because Borax is a much better product in all kind of sense. And like I said, in Europe, that's why it's allowed. But here, for some reason, we use it only for clothes. And in Europe, we don't use it for clothes, by the way. Like, it's only for food.
How did you get involved with this?
I know the in and outs. The caviar farmers, they're from my hometown. And so through mutual friends, we came in contact with them, and they were looking for someone in the United States, physically in the United States, that could start the US operation. And so I said, why not? So it started also as a side business, but it's been growing very, very well, especially for the way that we do business, the traceability, the full transparency, the service that we give to our clients like David, and the fact that we really want to promote good products, good techniques, good farming, ethical and sustainable procedures. And that's why we continued and are doing a good job for now.
It seems like the customers in the United States anyway are looking for that, looking to products where there's some transparency. But also, I think at such a high-end product, don't you want to get the best? So how do you figure that out, right?
It's a niche product that a lot of people are starting to discover, but it is an expensive product for the right reason. And I do think that people should be maybe not concerned, but still raise a flag when there is sturgeon caviar that is not expensive, because there is something that is just not clicking. It could be the origin. It could be the fact that whether it's actually sturgeon caviar or not, because caviar is simply a fish raw egg outside the fish. So it could be salmon caviar. It could be what it's called tobiko that you find on sushi, or fly fish, or paddlefish. For example, a lot of caviar that's being sold at a much cheaper price is the paddlefish, which is sort of like a long distance cousin of the sturgeon, different families, different everything. But if you look at one and the other, you see some similarities. And yes, people should learn and educate themselves, but it's a very, very complicated industry.
I love a good look behind the scenes. Just think about those summer tomatoes that you grow in pots, watering, pruning, and hovering over them for a series of summer weeks before you get your first mouth-watering cherry tomato. And then compare that to how long it takes to produce the finest caviar. Like 25 years. And it stands to reason that a fish that grows to good health in that quarter century needs to be raised in the most pristine environment. The environmental practices of the Salmopan farm in Italy are admirable. I know that you are not having caviar as often as you are having steak or a good cherry tomato, but when and if you do, look for the CITES tag on the tin for that traceability. I sure wish that was available for wheat and pork and other things that we love to eat. Thanks for joining me today on this fascinating journey into the cool, clear waters of sturgeon farming, where we wait patiently for our caviar to be ready. One bite, in this case of a very teeny fish egg, can lead you into a world of shenanigans, cutting corners, and also one where farmers take pride in their excellence and put it on a label so you know all the hard work they put into it. This has been another fascinating episode of One Bite is Everything, made possible with expert support from Sonia Dillon for research and editing, and from Russell Chapa for original music and sound design. I am your host, Dana DePrima, and I look forward to being here with you every week. Before we are together again, I hope that you will take a minute to give this podcast a 5-star rating and to write a review recommending it to others. That would really be the best. See you next week for another episode of One Bite is Everything.